Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other news now. And protests have taken place outside the ice rink, where a joint North and South Korean ice hockey team are playing a friendly match against Sweden ahead of the Winter Olympic Games. The supporters of the combined team called for peace, while opponents tore up a North Korean flag and a portrait of the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. 29-year-old Anthony Condron died in hospital following an incident in the Mayor Bar in the early hours. A 22-year-old man, a 24-year-old and a 23-year-old are being questioned now by detectives. 3 men have been arrested on suspicion of murder after a man was fatally injured at a bar in Liverpool on Saturday morning. Well, black cab rapist John Warboys has been moved from the Belmarsh prison in London after an outcry at him being close to his victims. It's believed he's been sent back to Wakefield prison in West Yorkshire while legal proceedings take place over his release on parole. It's also understood that details of fresh allegations made by 5 women have been passed to police. Uma Thurman has accused Harvey Weinstein of sexually assaulting her after they worked together on Pulp Fiction. The actress claims that he tried to force himself on her in a hotel room in the mid-1990s. Mr. Weinstein's lawyer has said he acknowledged making a pass at Miss Thurman and apologised profusely for it immediately. But he did question why she should wait 25 years to discuss the incident and embellish what had actually happened. The aviation watchdog is to investigate airline seating practices after concerns that passengers are unclear whether they need to pay to sit together. Research by the Civil Aviation Authority suggests that there's widespread confusion over how seats are allocated for groups and families, where travellers in the UK pay between £160 million and £390 million a year for allocated seating, with most paying between £5 and £30 per seat. A Northern Ireland Assembly member is facing criticism for taking the law into his own hands after he used bolt cutters to remove a clamp from the front wheel of his car. Well, Sinn Féin confirmed Jerry Kelly's actions after footage emerged on social media, which reportedly showed him freeing his car outside a gym in Belfast. His solicitors are now dealing with the matter. A chemical called BPA, which is used in plastic food packaging, has been found in the bodies of 86% of teenagers who took part in a recent study. Now, the European Commission says the chemical affects hormones, but others insist it's been well studied and is safe. Here's my report.
BPA is an industrial chemical that's been used to make certain plastics. It's found in some tins, cans, even inside processed foods. A 2-year study here at Exeter University has found it's also inside teenagers' bodies, including Amalia, Merlin and Frez.
I'm really passionate about plastic pollution, so by knowing that this is in here, we're polluting our bodies as well as polluting the environment just as much, which is really shocking to me.
Well, tins are clearly the worst culprit. A lot of tins have a plastic lining on the inside of them, which is a white lining. Now, this resin stops the tin from rusting, but the BPA from it can leak into the food, and often does.
If you're in a rush and you're shopping around, you don't have time to just pick up a packaging, peel off the film and try and work out, has this got BPA in or not? So actually choosing products that you know for sure, like the packaging didn't have BPA, it's really quite difficult.
The survey looked at 94 students and it found that BPA passes through the body pretty quickly, in around 6 hours. But 86% of teenagers surveyed had traces of the chemical inside their body. Sky's Ocean Rescue campaign has been looking at the impact plastics can have on our oceans. But this latest research suggests it can make its way into humans as well.
The European Commission has recently ruled that the amount of BPA in certain food packaging has to be reduced, and that's because they're concerned about potential health effects. In the past, studies have linked BPA to things like heart disease, even cancer. But many say there's not enough evidence to prove that's the case.
What do you think that will do?
The leader of the research project here at Exeter University is calling for better labelling on packaging so that people can make informed choices.
Teenagers are one of the groups of people in our population that have the highest levels of BPA in their urine when you measure them. Although we're not quite sure exactly why that is. One theory is that it's because teenagers eat more junk food than a lot of the population, and junk food is a particularly rich source of BPA.
But the British Plastics Federation has said BPA is one of the most studied chemicals in recent history, and the current safety measures were reaffirmed as safe for adults, children and unborn children by the European Food Standards Agency as recently as October 2016. BPA is undoubtedly under increasing scrutiny. In some countries, it's even been banned from the production of baby bottles. But some insist it's safe to use. Rebecca Williams, Sky News.
Now the Winter Olympics gets underway in South Korea on Friday, and despite heightened tensions between the two countries, North Korea is sending a team of athletes to Pyeongchang, where North and South Korea have also announced that they'll field a joint women's ice hockey team at the Games. But despite the apparent mood of reconciliation, North Korea has also announced that it will be holding a large-scale military parade on the day before the Olympics begin. We're joining me now from Busan in South Korea is Robert Kelly, Professor of International Relations at Busan National University in South Korea. Good afternoon to you. We have seen a bit of a reconciliation over the last few weeks between North and South Korea. Is there a chance of the Peace Olympics actually leading to any form of political progress on the peninsula?
Yeah, I think there is a chance. If the North Koreans actually allow sort of the spirit of the Olympics, the sort of Peace Olympics or whatever, to carry through into the talks, a lot depends on how the North Koreans respond. The South Korean government really wants negotiations. This particular South Korean government is run by liberals and really does want some kind of deal with North Korea. So the South Koreans are ready. The South Korean population doesn't want a war. They're very anti-Donald Trump. They'd like to have a deal as well. So there's a lot of willingness to move on the southern side, but the North has got to make some genuine concessions on things like human rights or nuclear weapons, or we're going to be back where we've always been, which is sort of debating, marginal things, but not really getting to the meat of it.
What do you think North Korea's motivation is for moving the military parade that's usually held in April to a day before the actual ceremony?
Yeah, I have to say that I found that pretty disappointing. I mean, I think this is why sort of conservatives and hawks are always kind of skeptical about talks with the North Koreans, because they do this kind of stuff. It's hard to read the parade the day before the Olympics, no less, as anything other than an attempt to sort of bully or sort of impress South Korea before the talks, and perhaps even the world, right? I mean, the whole world is coming to watch the Olympics. It's this big sort of moment of sort of like peace and harmony, ideally, common humanity and all that. Yet, 100 miles away, the North Koreans are going to be marching, goose-stepping soldiers. I mean, it looks an awful lot like they're sending a signal. It looks an awful lot like they're trying to impress everybody that even though you're going to South Korea, we're still here.
Is there an argument, as many have suggested, that North Korea can't be trusted, that they're simply trying to buy time to develop their capabilities even more?
Yeah, I wouldn't dispute that, right? I mean, we know that in the 1990s and the 2000s, I think a lot of people agree that they did this sort of thing in order to move the missile program and the nuclear program along. This time around, it's not really clear to me why. There's a lot of sort of argument out there that the reason why the North Koreans are looking for talks this time is because the sanctions are really starting to bite and they're having a lot of trouble getting stuff. And so they're hoping that if they reach out to South Korea, that kind of drives a split between the South Koreans and the Americans, because Donald Trump has been saying such tough stuff. But the South Koreans want talks, so maybe the South Koreans will bolt a little bit on the Americans and give them some sanctions relief. The North Koreans have already asked for favors. They've already asked for oil and money to participate in the Olympics. So, that's exactly the concern that a lot of people have, right? Are they going to sort of use this as a wedge to extract stuff?
Well, on the idea of that wedge between South Korea and the United States, is it working?
A little bit, although Donald Trump, to be honest, is so unpredictable on this kind of stuff. 1 minute he's saying fire and fury, and the next minute he was taking credit for the North Koreans and the South Koreans having talks. So as long as the American position kind of swings with Donald Trump's mood, it's hard to argue that, the Americans are the hawks and the South Koreans are the doves, because, because Trump is just kind of all over the place. Broadly speaking, yeah, I do think there's some potential. But on the other hand, the Americans and the South Koreans have been allied since the 1950s. They've gone through a lot of really rough patches before. I doubt the Olympics are really going to drive a wedge that much. And a lot of people out there in the American government, some, people like Tillerson and stuff, like Secretary of State Tillerson, have actually wanted talks, right? I mean, the conversation's been dominated by the hawks like H.R. McMaster, but there are a fair number of people in the Trump administration that want talks with North Korea also. So it's not clear to me that the Americans are sort of like sprinting towards strikes this year.
But there has been talk of the possibility of a limited military strike on North Korea. Do you think that that is likely to happen, and what are the implications then for South Korea?
Yeah, well, the implications for South Korea are pretty negative, in my opinion. I think there's a great deal of anxiety, man. I know it. You can just see it in the papers every day that if the Americans strike North Korea without sort of South Korea's buy-in, the North Koreans might hit back at South Korea, so the South Koreans might end up carrying the costs for an American strike. That would almost certainly damage the alliance beyond repair. Whether or not there'll be strikes this year, I'm sort of loath to predict that they will happen, but certainly the likelihood of strikes has gone up substantially. There was a recent decision by Washington to not send an ambassador to South Korea who had opposed strikes, which kind of is sending the signal. A lot of people are reading here to mean that the Trump people are looking for an ambassador who will endorse a strike on North Korea. Certainly the possibility of it is greater than it's been in 25 years. Yeah, there's a fair amount of anxiety here.
Is this reconciliation likely to last?
In my opinion, no. I mean, the fundamental issues between the South and the North are still really outstanding, right? Nuclear weapons, human rights, marketization, things like this. And it's just not clear to me that the Olympics are going to move that kind of stuff. You know, we've had these sorts of engagements with North Korea in the past, and they've not really changed the regime or brought it around to make the kind of concessions that would actually get a genuine peace. You know, we should always try. North Korea is the most dangerous country in the world. It's got nuclear weapons now, too, which makes it even more dangerous. We should always talk to the North, given how terrifying it is. But, you know, unless the North was prepared to make some kind of genuine concession, you know, like letting inspectors back in so we can see the state of safety and maintenance in the plants, for example, that would be a huge concession, right? If the North Koreans don't give us something real, then the South isn't going to give anything real either, and it'll just be sort of a cute dance of some athletes at the Olympics, and it won't really go anywhere.
OK, Robert Kelly, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, the actress Uma Thurman has accused producer Harvey Weinstein of sexually assaulting her after they worked together on Pulp Fiction. Welcome back. Let's find out now what's coming up in the sport later.
Thank you. Coming up in the sport at 1:45. The first.
Now, the actress Uma Thurman has accused Harvey Weinstein of sexually assaulting her after they worked together on Pulp Fiction. Ms. Thurman has claimed that the Hollywood producer tried to force himself on her in a hotel room in the mid-90s. Well, Mr. Weinstein's lawyer has said he acknowledged making a pass at Ms. Thurman and apologised for it immediately, but he has questioned why she'd wait 25 years to discuss the incident and embellish what really happened. Phil Edwards has this report.
According to Uma Thurman, she was sexually assaulted by Harvey Weinstein.
Now let's take a look at the weather.
By the springtime flowers of a mountain lake, to the first snowfall on a winter's day.
It'll be dry with sunny spells for most, best in the west, but there will be wintry showers around, mostly near eastern coast. It'll be chilly, especially in the south, with a raw wind blowing across southeast England. Most places will stay dry with sunny spells all afternoon, but there will be a scattering of showers for eastern parts of both Britain and Ireland. The odd one may develop further west, and the showers will be mostly of rain at first, but will turn increasingly wintry. Wintry showers will continue near many eastern coasts overnight.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
This is Sky News. Coming up, a government spending cuts undermining efforts to tackle loneliness. You're watching Sky News. The top stories this hour. At least 2 people have died and more than 50 have been injured after 2 trains collided in the US state of South Carolina. The Home Secretary Amber Rudd has warned hard Brexiteers in the Conservative Party that the government is more united over leaving the European Union than they think. MPs are warning that rumoured cuts to the Royal Marines would significantly undermine national security. The Defence Select Committee is urging the government not to reduce troop numbers or scrap 2 specialist ships. Well, let's get more now on how Home Secretary Amber Rudd claiming the government is more united on Brexit than critics think. It's after reports that Theresa May is facing a coup, which would put Boris Johnson in number 10 and Jacob Rees-Mogg as Chancellor if she continues with plans to keep Britain in a customs union with the European Union. Well, joining me now from Westminster are the political editor of The New Statesman, George Eaton, and senior political correspondent at The Times, Lucy Fisher. Good afternoon to both of you. Let's start with you then, George. This news that there is a potential coup facing Theresa May. What's your reaction to that?
Well, for much of her premiership, Theresa May has enjoyed the support of the Brexiteers because she was so quick to commit to what critics call hard Brexit. That's leaving the single market and leaving the customs union. But her refusal to set out her desired end state for the UK in Brexit has caused understandable suspicion among the Brexiteers. There are signs that Brexit has been slowly softening. And you can see the clear incentive for the Brexiteers is to get one of their own in number 10, someone who will be far more optimistic and confident about Brexit, because after all, Theresa May campaigned for Remain, and she's also repeatedly refused to say she'd vote for Brexit now. So that does mean that there is a rather gloomy atmosphere around the project.
OK, Lucy, the Brexiteer Bernard Jenkins has today written in the Sunday Telegraph. He said that ministers are vague, they're divided over Brexit. Do you agree?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. It's quite clear from all the noises coming out of the cabinet and the junior ministerial ranks that there is unhappiness, despite what they may have to say on the record in public, like Amber Rudd this morning. I think it's very difficult, the situation that the Prime Minister's in. Yes, she's being told lead or go by the likes of the Spectator and indeed many of her own MPs. But at the same time, it's her indecision, it's this vagueness that's keeping the government together. In her cabinet, the Remainers and staunch Leavers still think that there's everything to play for. So you can see why she's in this difficult position and why she's tried to string it out for so long without coming down firmly on any one side in many of the debates about, for example, being in the customs union or a customs union. But it seems like this week really might be a crunch week, what with there being the cabinet meetings on Wednesday and Thursday to finally try and thrash out some clarity about the end state of Brexit.
George, are internal clashes making it harder for the Prime Minister to deal with Brexit?
Absolutely, but it's important that everyone remembers, whoever the leader of the Conservative Party is, the party is going to have two problems. The first is that it doesn't have a parliamentary majority. That would make it very hard, for instance, to pursue the low tax, low regulation model that some Brexiteers would like to see, because there simply aren't the votes for it in Parliament. And secondly, that whoever the leader is, the Conservatives are going to be divided over Europe. This has been one of the longest running political civil wars in history. It's gone on for decades, and this shows all the signs of being the bloodiest chapter yet. And Theresa May is in some ways a symptom of the Tories' problems, not the cause of them.
Lucy, Theresa May will, of course, be thankful that lots of her cabinet have come out today in her defence, saying that actually ministers are more divided, more united on Brexit than perhaps people think. Do you think she can hang on?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, we keep having these sort of peaks and troughs in the febrile nature of rumours, of coups, of talk of discontentedness. It's interesting, the last real key juncture we had when it was this febrile was after the party conference last October, which was, by all accounts, fairly disastrous. It's interesting talking to cabinet ministers and other senior Tory figures in recent days about how this particular period compares to that period. People have described it to me back in October as having been more in regret about the malaise the party found itself in and the position of the Prime Minister. This feels a lot more bad-tempered, people say. So I think that the Prime Minister is certainly in danger. Whether or not she can hang on, it remains to be seen.
George, do you agree?
I think it's possible Theresa May will be gone this year. There's several possible moments of danger for her. One is when she finally comes to a position on Brexit. To choose is to divide, and some people are going to be unhappy. So for some people, it will be too soft. For others, it will be too hard. And then the May local elections are also seen by MPs and by her opponents as a potential opportunity to get rid of her. If, as expected, the party suffers very heavy losses to Labour, MPs may fear, actually, although we're neck and neck with them in the national polls, perhaps in reality the position is worse than expected. And obviously that was the case at the general election. But for other reasons, as I said, the Tories have huge problems regardless of who's leading them, and whichever leader takes over now is going to have inherited a divided party. And there's some who think actually Theresa May is quite a useful political leader to absorb the pressure of Brexit and then to hand over to another leader once Britain has left the EU, who can try and reunify the party.
Well, Lucy, I suppose the problem is whoever is the Prime Minister, they've got a tough job on their hands because they can't please everyone, can they?
No, that's absolutely right. But as George said, some choices have to be made. And I think we're seeing that now with more and more delays to legislation happening. We might not be ready for Brexit Day. We learnt over the weekend that the immigration bill has been delayed until the autumn. That's an essential bill covering lots of different areas, but particularly the ETA electronic visa scheme that needs to be ready by March 2019. So some concerns gathering in Whitehall and more broadly in Westminster about bills like the immigration immigration bill and things having enough parliamentary time to get through before we leave the European Union.
George, almost every weekend we're here discussing Theresa May's future, and every single time she pulls through, she's incredibly resilient.
Yes, I mean, this is a symptom of any Prime Minister, really, that you remember the endless discussions we had about when Tony Blair was going to go, the endless times that Gordon Brown faced coups and attempts to remove him. John Major, of course, faced a leadership challenge from John Redwood. He clinged on. For Theresa May, though, her position really has been incredibly fragile since the election, since she called that election, which she didn't need to call, and blew her party's majority. But as history has shown, weak prime ministers can endure, and normally that's because there isn't a clear alternative, and because everyone fears unleashing the gates of hell and plunging the party into a bloody leadership contest. And the Tories are very mindful of the dangers of that. So until things progress from off-the-record briefings and from the Tories essentially despairing about their prospect to actual ministerial resignations and people making a real challenge to Theresa May, then her position may not be as fragile as it appears.
Lucy, let's turn our attention now to Jacob Rees-Mogg, because he was, of course, targeted in Bristol by pretty aggressive protesters on Friday night. The Prime Minister says she's now looking into showing how politics is basically under threat from increasing levels of intimidation. Do you agree?
Yeah, I'm sort of ambivalent about the focus on this. Of course, it's appalling that any MP should face any physical threat. And seeing the footage, I know Jacob Rees-Mogg said that he wasn't attacked, but it certainly looked like people were jostling up close to him. Of course, no one should face any kind of intimidation or abuse, physical or otherwise, when out and about campaigning or wherever. So I think it's important that sort of principle is upheld. At the same time, when there is such a legislative logjam, the idea that MPs are concentrating on themselves, it could appear quite navel-gazing to the rest of the nation, focusing on this subject.
George, final thought with you. Do you think politicians are under more pressure, more abuse now, and why do you think that is?
They absolutely are, and obviously social media has provided radicals on both sides with an outlet to harass MPs, and our politics is becoming far more polarised. Jeremy Corbyn emerged, a figure on the Labour left who'd been marginalised in his party for decades, and obviously now he's profoundly reshaped the party. And the Tories, some young Tories in particular, see Jacob Rees-Mogg as their Corbyn. He's someone who means what he says and says what he means. The problem is most of his colleagues, I think, wouldn't want to let him anywhere near a leadership contest because, although some of the treatment of him was inappropriate, you can see why his views divide people. He said he's against abortion in all circumstances, he's against equal marriage, he's voted for every welfare cut, including the most punitive. And this is a symptom a problem potentially both parties have, where you have figures who are popular within the party, but who find it harder to reach the voters you need to persuade at election time.
OK, George, Lucy, thanks so much for your thoughts. Now, loneliness affects more than 9 million people in the UK, and it's such a big issue that the Prime Minister recently appointed a Minister for Loneliness. But local government cuts might be making a bad situation even worse, with community hubs and meeting places all facing closure. Neil Patterson went to Northamptonshire to find out more.
I'll tell you another one. I've got a lovely sparkle one.
In a quiet corner of rural Northamptonshire, in the small market town of Rons.
And the Department for Culture, Media and Sport has replied to that in a report. It says in a statement, work has begun on developing a cross-government strategy on loneliness in England to be published later on this year. This will bring together government, local government, public services, the voluntary and community sector to identify opportunities to tackle loneliness. You're watching Sky News. Coming up in the sport, Palace and Newcastle kick off Super Sunday.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Slide up along here. Maybe come to the side. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Time now for an update from the Sky Sports News Centre.
This programme is brought to you by Vitality Health and Life Insurance.
Lifting a leg. My speciality. Oh, sorry.
Getting active brings its own rewards.
Good afternoon, Greg.
Anyone fancy?
So now to take a look at the weather.
From the clear blue sky of a Doha morning to the fresh autumn breeze in the city of love.
It'll be dry with sunny spells for most, best in the west, but there will be wintry showers around, mostly near eastern coast. It'll be chilly, especially in the south, with a raw wind blowing across southeast England. Most places will stay dry with sunny spells all afternoon, but there will be a scattering of showers for eastern parts of both Britain and Ireland, and the odd one may develop further west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, at least 2 people have died and 50 have been injured after 2 trains collided in the US state of South Carolina. More on that after the break.